Hello, and welcome to Policy Conversations with Dr. P. Today we'll be addressing policy ACAB, which is Prohibition Against Sexual Harassment and Other Forms of Harassment and Discrimination. Today I'll be joined by Kendall, Jonathan, and Principal Valancourt. Would you like to introduce yourselves to our viewers?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kendall. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in 12th grade.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Feliciano. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm also in 12th grade.
And hi, I am Miss Valancourt. I am the principal of the high school, and I use she, her pronouns.
Okay, so I know you've had a chance to look this policy over. It's one of our longer policies, and you've prepared some questions that you'd like to discuss today. So I'll turn it over to you.
You want to start?
You can start it.
Okay. So I think one of our biggest questions was if a member of the school is being harassed or discriminated against online, does the contract continue on?
You mean the policy?
Yeah.
Is the policy applicable for online?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry to hit you off with a legal concept right off the chute, but what we talk about with that is nexus. A nexus is a connection.
Mm-hmm.
So this policy is about providing a harassment-free learning environment and a harassment-free workplace. So in some cases, online harassment or sexual harassment can interfere with students' ability to learn or with workers' ability to work in the school. So if there's a nexus there between the school or work environment and the online activity, then this policy can be enforced.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no nexus, so for example, if this is a type of harassment or discrimination that someone is experiencing with a member of another community in an online environment that has no connection to the school, then there may be other supportive measures we can provide, but this policy really wouldn't be implicated. And I know Principal Valancourt has often been involved in following up, investigating, trying to support students through online activities. So I don't know if you would like to say anything about your own experiences with that.
Yeah, sure. So, it is a very frequent complaint from students and concern from students and sometimes caregivers when things are posted online that feel discriminatory or are incredibly uncomfortable. And so schools seems to be a natural place where people bring those concerns. So young people share often things that they see posted online that they fear may be upsetting to somebody or discriminatory to another group, and they may consider it harassment. And when those things come up and they're brought to our attention, we immediately look into it and we help that student connect to people in this building who can help them problem solve and navigate how to get through that. So for example, if a kid comes and they say, hey, I have this Snapchat and this kid is using derogatory language or harassing language in this Snapchat, we work it out together. We say, well, who is this? How are you connected to them? How did it impact you? And typically we get caregivers involved. We call families, and we work with both the family and the student to block people on social media. And if it needs more support, we have them talk to an adjustment counselor. But we try to address all of those concerns. Sometimes it doesn't launch an investigation, but we are able to work with students on learning how to navigate online safety and to how to respond or not respond to those things. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I guess our next question would be, for students that are experiencing harassment in school and don't feel comfortable coming to a direct teacher or a caregiver, will there be like a third party that's instilled so that they can go and turn to them if they feel more comfortable doing that?
Sure. So if it's not a student or a caregiver, who are you thinking? Can you talk a little bit more about what you're trying to?
Oh yeah, I was just wondering if there'd be like a third party, like someone that could be introduced like for guidance. I know that there is some counselors that would be able to help.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So our goal is to make sure that everyone in this building has an adult or somebody that they can trust and go to when something comes up. Oftentimes that could be, your Mentor Monday Flex Block teacher. It could be your guidance counselor. Some people are really close to Abel, who's one of our custodial staff. Some people are really connected to Mr. Gonzalez in our student support room. So when we have surveyed and talked to students, usually there is one person in this building that they connect to. And so we would hope that they would seek out that person and ask for some support in either reporting or writing a letter. A lot of times, believe it or not, students do talk to their parents or caregivers, and they do reach out on their behalf. I think it's about building that trust and community within to make sure students know who to talk to and how to get their needs met. And so sometimes even friends may come forward and say, hey, my friend is struggling, or my friend is being harassed or discriminated against. Could you help us? And so that's how we would get involved and have that, launch that conversation.
Another question we had is, how does the school community think about how will we protect the victims of harassment and discrimination, especially going through the interview process, which is something brought up in the policy. I think sometimes it can be really hard for victims of this to come forward and speak their truths, and I think it would be very powerful if the school was able to protect them in a safe way. So how do you guys plan on doing that?
I think that was one that you were going to answer too.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to answer
Take
that.
up.
I think that connects a little bit with the last question too, is making sure that everyone does have an adult that they feel comfortable talking to. And I think I'm hearing that part of your question is, how can that person who may be reporting, be able to tell their story but not have to tell it over and over? Is that some of it, right? Yeah, that can be a burden to somebody who is a victim. And so what we typically do when we start our investigation process is that we meet with whoever is bringing the complaint forward, with one person, and somebody else is taking notes. And we take the notes so we can go back and look, and then we can review those notes with the person reporting and make sure that we have an accurate, detailed account of the complaint or the report. And that way we don't have to keep asking for the victim to share their story over and over. We can use note-taking tools to do that.
The other thing that I would relate to this question is, all of our policies, including this policy, include a prohibition against retaliation. So typically when investigators are talking to potential witnesses, they'll be advising them that they need to be careful about retaliating against the individual who made the complaint, because that in and of itself is a violation of the policy. We also have done a number of things to create safety plans for both the complainant and the respondent while the investigation is going on. Sometimes we create plans that keep individuals away from each other within the building while we're trying to figure out what's going on. Can you think of any other safety plan components you might have put in place?
Absolutely.
I think sometimes we've told people that they can't communicate online anymore until we figure out what's going on.
So often we'll review a schedule with a student and figure out how to get from one location to the next location without having to run into the person that they're experiencing conflict with. We'll look carefully at when folks are eating lunch and try to do our best to make sure that they're not sharing space or in lunch at the same time. We will come up with a plan for entering the building and exiting the building, and really work hard to make sure we come up with a plan for if the student is feeling dysregulated, or there is a threat, or they're just really, they need a space to go and to think and process and sort through the day or their experience, that there's a place for them to go and they know how to get there. So again, an adjustment counselor, a counselor, guidance counselor, and administrator, making sure they know where to go if there's conflict.
Another question that we had was, if there was no third party that witnessed the discrimination and or harassment, would the procedure still be the same, or how would we go about that?
Absolutely. So it's very rare that we would not have evidence to support a complaint or a claim. So typically somebody has text messages, or they have pictures, or we can see it on our school cameras that are in community spaces. And that's really a major part of that investigation, is trying to find that evidence. Usually folks aren't alone in the building. There's either an adult there are classmates there, again, the cameras. So we can typically find evidence. And if we can't, we still take that statement and we will still run through the protocols of the investigation and come up with a determination at the end.
And the other thing that I would add on that, to your question on this, is that just because there's not a finding doesn't mean that we'll withhold supportive measures. So oftentimes there may be a complaint that is not able to be fully substantiated, but we can still put into place a lot of the protections that we were just discussing with respect to the last situation. And in many cases, just bringing the issue to the awareness of the other individual is helpful in and of itself, because it sends a message that, you know, maybe we're not 100% sure this happened, but if it did, it's something that the other individual finds harassing. So don't do it. We don't tolerate it here and we don't accept it.
Another question we have is, if there is an issue of harassment and discrimination that goes from in school to then out of school, is the school still able to take part in that? Or if it becomes out of school, are you guys not allowed to?
So this is like the nexus question that we were discussing at the beginning, sort of in reverse.
Yeah.
And it does happen. Sometimes we have situations that might begin within the school environment that then spill out into the community. They might even spill out into other communities. Our sphere of influence and the area in which the policy is effective is really the school and the workplace. We can address the behaviors that are happening within the school, and we can create safety within the school, but we really don't have the ability to enforce this policy, say, in a neighborhood or in a neighboring community. What we can do, though, is communicate with other authorities. We can advise students on where they may want to take their complaints that have to do with behavior outside of the school. And if in particular it involves students at another school, which is often the case, we can communicate with the administrators at the other school to make them aware of the situation and ask them to deal with the pieces that they can control within their own school or work environment.
Another question that we had about the harassment and discrimination was that because we all know that sometimes it takes a little more time depending on the situation of the victim, and would there be like a threshold of time where like they wouldn't be able to seek like support from a third party or authority?
So there's nothing like a statute of limitations within our policies. I guess there is sort of a practical limitation in the sense that at some point students graduate, either the individuals who are the target or the individuals who are the alleged aggressors, which makes them much less available for any kind of support or intervention. So there's that. But there is, unlike some other policies, there is no 30-day limit or 60-day limit. You know, individuals are able to report when they feel comfortable to report. One of the things that can be a little tricky about that is if a report is made long after an incident, it may be that the behavior is no longer occurring. And so then it becomes, I think, a little bit tricky about how to address it without potentially reactivating the behavior. Because the goal always is not to try to criminalize or punish students. It's to get the behavior to stop. And so if you're already in a situation where the behavior has ceased, administrators have to handle that somewhat gingerly to avoid sort of reactivating whatever the core issue was.
One way we see that reactivation, so to speak, is online and through social media. So sometimes an incident happens in, let's say, 8th grade, and then in 10th grade it resurfaces through social media. So it came across somebody's feed as, and it resurfaces, and kids bring that up, and it, it triggers all of those, the investigation, the feelings that happen, and sometimes that creates a situation that, again, we have to begin to investigate. We have to see who put it back out there. So we do take it seriously, and then we remind all parties, like, here's what happened. This is what the investigation looked like. If we can share the outcome, we do. And then we remind folks of the safety plan. And we, again, review how social media is really important. You need to be safe. And once you publish something, as you know, sometimes it haunts you for a long time and it just comes up again. But we do see that, Jonathan, where issues do come up or resurface. And so that's typically how we address that.
A next question that we had was, at what point of a violation of any of the policies do you think that the police would have to get involved, or any sort of authorities?
Thank you for that question. So we investigate potential violations of policies and supportive measures and discipline that might fall from the violations of policies. However, in the process of doing that, we are sometimes exposed to information that leads us to believe that there could be a criminal element to what we're looking at. At that point, we have an obligation to share the information that we have with the police so they can make a determination on whether or not a crime was committed. There is such a thing or concept of a criminal level of harassment. Many of the things that would fall under the sexual harassment component of this policy would also be crimes. And so we do have an obligation to share that information with the police. We also have an obligation to share with DCF if in the process of investigating one of these complaints, we become aware that a minor student may be a victim of abuse or neglect. And whenever we do that, we are not making a judgment about whether or not a criminal threshold has been reached. We don't have the expertise to do that. All we're doing is saying, we've gathered enough information that we think that this may go beyond the policy and also be a criminal matter, and to share that information. So that's important for individuals to know when they're making a complaint. We will try to respect confidentiality to the greatest extent possible. But if someone discloses to us that they may have been a victim of a crime, or that they may have been a victim of abuse or neglect, then that's something that we have to share.
We would always let the student know that that was our plan and how we plan to move forward. And we often invite them to that conversation to share in the reporting.
Another question is, if there's an issue between maybe potentially a student and a teacher, but it doesn't fall under the policy where it isn't considered harassment or discrimination, but a student or someone who isn't a position of power is extremely uncomfortable, how would the school handle that? Is there a way to deal with issues like that?
Thank you for that question. We are talking about one policy right now. This is episode 3 of a series of podcasts on policies. And so even if a behavior doesn't fall specifically within this anti-discrimination policy, it might fall within another. 2 policies that I will sort of tease to the audience right now are Title IX. That's a policy that has to do with discrimination on the basis of sex. And in that, the power difference becomes very important. There's a thing under Title IX called quid pro quo harassment, which means, for example, a teacher saying, if you want an A on this paper, why don't you come over here and give me a kiss? That would be something that would be a potential Title IX violation. Probably would be a violation of this policy as well. Another policy that takes into account the difference in power is bullying and harassment. The bullying policy is applicable to all members of the school community. So it's not just students who may be a victim of bullying by other students. It could be students who are a victim of bullying by staff. It could also be staff who are victims of bullying by students, or staff who are victims of bullying by other staff. So what I've said in other episodes, and I'll reiterate here, is it's not a victim's job to try to figure out which policy may have been violated. If something happens and it doesn't feel right to you, the important thing is that you let a trusted adult know. And then it's our responsibility to sort through the policies and figure out which ones may apply.
This is less of a reactionary thing, but is there a way our community can prevent this? Maybe by having an assembly at the beginning of the year, normalize, I think, sharing pronouns and stuff like that. Would that be a possibility? Or if there is something that spreads from just individuals to our wider school community, is there a way to address that in a safe space for people?
Yeah, so I think bringing the community together and listening and sorting things out is always really important part of healing and prevention and being proactive, right? So all of that. I have personally found that when we bring such a lot, we have 900 plus kids, right? And so when we bring such a large student body together, it takes away from the intimacy of being able to really hear somebody's experience and or to be able to share protocols or policies, because it's often hard to be able to listen with so many people, in a space together. And this is also one of the reasons we have FlexBlock now, so we can ask teachers to host certain conversations potentially about policy. It's also why the student government and the student union have talked about coming together and having listening sessions where they're listening to people's experiences and trying to sort through next steps. So those are just some spaces in which we can come together and have conversations like this. But I agree with you, Kendall, that the more we talk about this and the protections that are in place and how we can be proactive and refer to our code of conduct and review it together with adults and students, the more we can be preventative of harassment and discrimination.
If a student came to a guidance counselor or a principal or someone of authority and they already told their story once, and as we all know, the victim isn't obligated to keep repeating the story, what would like the suggestion be to the victim? Like, would it be okay for them to just say the story once and then after whoever they told that has authority to be able to relay it to the next person so that eventually, ultimately it could get to the authorities?
Yeah.
If it's that serious.
Right. So it's unfortunate, but sometimes we need the details to be revisited and stated again so we can make sure that we have accurate notes and reporting. Often what will happen is the person reporting who has come to that trusted adult may come together, the two of them may come together to see a principal or the associate principal, and together they can review what they just discussed. Sometimes a counselor or whoever that adult is may say, I just heard this story or I just got this report from this student, and may ask the student, would you like me to talk about what you told me? And you can fill in the blanks. And sometimes that student's like, yes. Or sometimes they just say, no, I'll do it again. I'll tell it again. So in partnership with their trusted adult, they can repeat that story, and then we can get that documented. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and in many cases, the individual who a student might go to first would not be an investigator. Typically, the only ones who do investigations within the district are the administrators. So it's very important for the administrator to get the information directly from the source. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of possibly telling a story to a friend and then having that person share it with someone else and then having it come back to you in a different way. So we don't want to have that happen when we're doing an investigation of a potential serious violation of someone's rights. So we want to hear from the victim directly. But as Principal Valancourt said, victims have a right to have support people with them, to help them tell the story, to make them feel more comfortable with it. And typically in the process, we would start by listening to the victim. So that person would be relaying their story once to an investigator, and then that would be it for them.
Is there a way our school community or the administration can create a safe space for people who have been victim to discrimination, harassment, assault? Is there a place that people could talk about that with each other or with trusted people without having it be in a sterile or uncomfortable place? Is there a way people could come together in a sense and share those experiences with each other?
So, yeah. So this is a lot like the assemblies, right?
Yeah.
So large formats sometimes just don't work, right? They're just not intimate enough. But, you know, we have a number of different support systems in place here with counselors and with adjustment counselors and guidance counselors. We currently have a contract with CSO. We have a CSO clinical support options.
Clinical support options.
Clinical support options. We have a contract with clinical support options to offer clinical support to our students here. And so her name is Emily, and she is currently working with, she's building and putting together support groups and affinity groups. And so those are some ways that people can come together and have more intimate conversations. But, you know, we would invite students to work with people in the community to offer support, whether that's with a therapist or in a student support group, whatever that might be. But we would help find opportunities for those. Sometimes school isn't the right place, but if it comes up at school, we definitely have systems in place to support kids.
And to just expand on that answer, because this is a policy that protects all members of the community, not only students. We have what's known as the Employee Assistance Program, or we often call it as EAP, which we can use to provide supportive measures for employees who may have been a victim of harassment or sexual harassment.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.